Welcome to my channel, Starlight Sci-Fi Story. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Lucas Hale had guarded embassies on 3 different planets. He had escorted diplomats who argued about trade routes. For 12 straight hours, he had protected a mining governor who believed every reflective surface might secretly be an assassin drone. None of that training, however, had prepared him for standing inside the royal palace of the Elthian Empire. The palace floated above a vast silver ocean that stretched to the horizon like liquid metal under starlight. Towering crystal arches curved overhead. Streams of glowing energy flowed through transparent walls like slow rivers of light. The entire structure looked less like a building and more like a living organism that had decided architecture was an interesting hobby. Lucas stood near the entrance of the Royal Council chamber, hands folded calmly behind his back. His posture was perfect. His uniform was immaculate. His eyes scanned every doorway and balcony with quiet professional focus. Inside his mind, however, one thought kept repeating: do not stare at the floating ceiling. The ceiling slowly shifted colors like a sunrise, trapped in slow motion. Lucas forced his attention back to the room. That was when he noticed it again. The princess was staring at him. Princess K sat beside her mother at the long council table where ministers discussed star charts, border treaties, and diplomatic missions. Lucas only caught fragments of the conversation: orbital corridors, trade negotiations, defense satellites. Meanwhile, the princess seemed deeply interested in a far more mysterious subject. Her bright silver eyes were fixed on Lucas with the intense curiosity of someone studying an unfamiliar constellation. Lucas remained perfectly still. Professional guards did not react to royal staring. Still, after several minutes, he began wondering if he had accidentally committed a terrible cultural mistake. Did I salute the wrong person? He replayed the morning in his head. He saluted the palace commander. He nodded politely at a floating translator drone. He almost saluted a statue before realizing statues usually didn't blink. Everything seemed normal. Yet the princess continued watching him like he had personally invented gravity. Lucas shifted his weight slightly. The floor shifted with him just a little, not dramatically, just enough to remind him that Larthian architecture occasionally adjusted gravity fields for structural stability. Lucas recovered his balance smoothly. Professional. Very professional. Inside his head, another thought appeared: if the floor does that again, I'm pretending it was intentional. Across the chamber, Queen Saratha spoke calmly with her advisors. She carried the quiet authority of someone who had ruled an empire for centuries. Like her daughter, she looked almost human, tall, elegant, long silver hair falling across royal robes, but the long, curved ears rising from the sides of her head marked her unmistakably as Lorian. Their species resembled humans in many ways, except when they didn't. Lucas had read the briefing files carefully before arriving. The royal bloodline possessed a rare ability known as resonance perception. Scientists described it as the ability to sense emotional energy patterns between individuals. Lucas understood roughly 3% of that explanation. For now, his job was simple: stand still, watch everything, protect the royal family, preferably without falling into alien furniture. Unfortunately, alien furniture seemed determined to challenge him. A small, floating chair drifted slowly across the chamber behind him. Lucas sensed movement and glanced over his shoulder. The chair rotated slightly, then stopped. Lucas narrowed his eyes. "Don't start," he muttered quietly. The chair floated away. Lucas looked forward. Again, Princess Kays was still watching him. Now she looked slightly amused. Lucas blinked once. "Great," the princess saw me threaten a chair. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Across the table, Queen Saratha noticed the interaction. She did not interrupt the council discussion, but her eyes briefly moved from her daughter to the human guard. Kales rarely paid this much attention to anyone outside the royal family, especially not a human who had arrived less than a week ago. Something about this was unusual. And in a palace that had existed for thousands of years, unusual things were rarely random. The next morning, Lucas was summoned to the Royal Research Tower. A hovering drone delivered the message. "Security Officer Lucas Hale," the machine said politely. "The Royal Science Council request your presence." Lucas blanked. "Am I in trouble?" The drone paused. "That outcome has not yet been determined." Lucas sighed. That was not comforting. Still, he followed the drone through the palace corridors. The hallways curved like rivers of glass. Energy lines pulsed beneath the floor. Outside, the transparent walls, massive floating islands, drifted through the sky. Eventually, they reached a circular laboratory filled with technology Lucas couldn't begin to understand. Floating rings spun slowly in midair. Screens filled with alien symbols hovered above glowing consoles. Several Larthian scientists stood near a platform at the center of the room. Officer Hale, the lead scientist, said politely. Lucas nodded. "Please tell me this isn't about the chair." The scientist exchanged confused glances. "The chair," Lucas waved a hand. "Never mind." The scientist gestured to the glowing platform. "Please stand there for a moment." Lucas eyed the machine suspiciously. It looked like the kind of device that either scanned you or accidentally teleported you somewhere unpleasant. "How long is a moment?" "Approximately 2 minutes." Lucas considered that 2 minutes wasn't enough time to accidentally turn someone into energy. Probably. He stepped onto the platform. Soft rings of light formed around him, slowly moving from head to toe. Sensation felt like standing inside a polite thunderstorm. Lucas remained perfectly still until the scanners reached his boots and made a cheerful chiming sound. Lucas looked down. "Did I pass something?" One scientist glanced at the screen. "Yes." "What was the test?" "Footwear integrity." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Good boots." The scanning continued. At first the scientist worked calmly, then one screen flashed, another emitted a warning tone. The lead researcher leaned forward. "Run that sequence again." The system repeated the scan. The warning appeared again. Lucas noticed the tension in the room. "Should I be concerned?" he asked. "No," the scientist replied automatically. Lucas waited, yet the lights intensified. More data filled the floating displays. Energy diagrams, neural patterns, quantum resonance charts. Lucas squinted at the screen. "That sounds expensive." A young scientist suddenly inhaled sharply. "That can't be correct." The lead researcher compared 2 patterns on the Display, they overlapped matched not perfectly but close enough that the system highlighted them in bright gold. Silence filled the room. Lucas folded his arms. Okay, he said slowly, now. I'm curious. The lead scientist turned toward him with a confused expression. Officer Hale, have you ever visited this planet before? No. Have you encountered Lorian technology? Only the chair. The scientist stared at the data again. This reading is extremely unusual. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. I feel like that word is being used a lot today. The scientist pointed to the screen. Your emotional resonance signature matches an archived pattern. Lucas frowned. Is that bad? Scientist hesitated. No, she paused, but it should be impossible. Lucas exhaled slowly. Impossible how? The scientists enlarged the second pattern on the screen. It belonged to someone recorded many years earlier. Someone important. Someone who once ruled beside Queen Saratha, the former king of the Elthian Empire, across the palace gardens. Princess Kay suddenly stopped walking. She looked toward the research tower. Strange feeling passed through her mind, like hearing a familiar melody from a forgotten memory, and somewhere inside the laboratory, Lucas Hale stood under the glowing scanners, completely unaware that his existence had just triggered something the entire Empire believed could never happen. Again, the first warning came from the outer defense satellites. At first, it looked like a sensor malfunction, a small distortion beyond the edge of the system. Then the distortion multiplied. Dozens of signals appeared, then hundreds. Inside the palace command chamber, alarms began to echo through the walls. Military officers rushed between holographic displays. Princess Kay stood beside her mother as the system map expanded across the air. A massive fleet had appeared beyond the outer asteroid belt, ships shaped like black spears. Cold, silent, moving with terrifying precision. Queen Saratha's voice remained calm. Identify them. The tactical officer swallowed. The fourth Dominion. Silence filled the room. The fourth were not diplomats. They were conquerors. Their empire expanded by destroying civilizations that could not resist them, and now their fleet was entering Lorian space. Lucas arrived moments later, summoned as part of the royal security team. He studied the holographic projection of enemy ships. That's a lot of ships. No exaggeration, the commander replied. Quietly, the fourth fleet outnumbered Larthian forces 3-1. Their ships were faster, their weapons were stronger, their war doctrine was simple. Overwhelm everything. Queen Saratha turned toward the council. Evacuation protocols. Several advisors hesitated. Leaving the capital meant abandoning the heart of the empire. But staying could mean extinction. Princess Kaya's looked toward Lucas. For a moment their eyes met. Lucas wasn't a strategist, he wasn't an admiral, he was just a human guard standing in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Still, he studied the enemy formation carefully. Something about it bothered him. They're too confident, Lucas said. Commander frowned. What? They jumped directly into sensor range. Lucas continued. Like they expect us to panic. The officers exchanged glances. The Vor had a reputation for psychological warfare. Lucas leaned closer to the projection. Then he noticed something else. Wait, he pointed at the enemy formation. These ships in the back, the tactical. Officer zoomed in, large vessels. Surrounded by escorts. Command carriers, the officer explained. Lucas nodded slowly. So that's their brain, the officer raised an eyebrow. That is a simplified description. Lucas folded his arms. What happens if the brain gets hit? The officer hesitated. Fleet coordination would collapse. Queen Saratha looked at him. You have an idea? Lucas scratched the back of his neck. Well, humans have a saying when you can't beat the whole army. He pointed at the command ships. Punch the general. The room went quiet. It was reckless, dangerous, possibly suicidal. But it was also the only strategy that might work. Princess K's felt something strange in her chest again. That same melody, that same impossible resonance. She looked at Lucas. Then we strike the brain. The Elthian fleet launched within the hour. Sleek silver warships emerged from hidden hangars beneath the palace ocean. Energy shields ignited like miniature suns. Lucas sat inside a small strike craft beside two alien pilots. He wasn't supposed to be here. Royal Guards did not normally participate in space combat, but the plan required someone reckless enough to fly directly into the enemy command formation. Apparently, that made him qualified. Princess K's watched the fleet depart. From the command deck, her senses vibrated with strange emotional echoes. Fear, hoping, and something else. Something tied to the human pilot flying toward impossible odds. Out in deep space the battle began. Larthian cruisers fired first. Beams of white energy tore through the darkness. The Fourth Fleet responded instantly. Thousands of missiles filled space with fire. Explosions lit the void like artificial stars. Lucas gripped the controls of the strike craft. Okay, he muttered. Let's try something stupid. The small fighter darted through the battlefield. Like a needle, enemy sensors struggled to track such a tiny target. The two Larathian pilots watched in disbelief as Lucas pushed the craft beyond safe maneuver limits. How are you still flying? One asked. Lucas grinned. Human reflexes. Missiles streak. Enemy ships fired interceptors. Still Lucas kept going, closer, closer, toward the center of the Fourth Fleet. The command carriers loomed ahead. Massive, armored, protected by dozens of escorts. Lucas exhaled slowly. All right, punched the general. He armed the fighter's experimental resonance weapon. The device had been designed to amplify Larith energy signatures. Normally, it required multiple ships to activate. Lucas had another idea. Princess, he whispered quietly through the comm channel, remember that resonance thing far away in the palace command room. Princess Kales closed her eyes. She focused on the strain connection she felt with the human pilot, the melody, the rhythm, the impossible resonance. Her mind reached across space, and the weapon in Lucas's fighter ignited. Beam of golden energy erupted from the small craft. Not just technology, something more. Human courage, alien resonance. Two species combining in a way no one had predicted. The beam struck the first command carrier. The massive ship exploded. Shock waves rippled through the Fourth Fleet. Fleet coordination collapsed instantly. Ships began colliding. Orders stopped transmitting. Confusion spread like wildfire. Lucas stared at the chaos unfolding around him. Well, he said quietly, that worked. Within minutes, the Fourth Fleet began retreating, without their command carriers there. Strategy had fallen apart. The invasion ended before it truly began, hours later. The palace balcony overlooked a peaceful silver ocean once again. Queen Saratha stood beside Princess Keys. Far below, the capital celebrated. Lucas leaned against the railing nearby, still wearing his flight suit, still looking slightly confused about how he survived. The Queen studied him thoughtfully. Human officer Hale. Lucas nodded politely. Yes, Your Majesty. You saved this empire. Lucas shrugged. I mostly pushed buttons. Princess K smiled softly. You did something more than that. Lucas looked out toward the stars. Humans are good at one thing. What is that? The Queen asked. Lucas smiled. When the universe says something is impossible. He looked back at them. We try it anyway. The wind carried distant celebration across the ocean, and in that moment the Lorian Empire understood something new about humanity. Humans were smaller, weaker, far less advanced, but they possessed something that frightened even ancient civilizations. They refused to believe defeat was inevitable, and sometimes that was enough to change the fate of the stars. The end.